This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can pre-order Final Fantasy by using my link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and in this video I'm continuing with my Final Fantasy Limited set review. I've already covered all of the cards in the main set, but we still need to take a look at the Final Fantasy Through the Ages bonus sheet. This is a subset of 64 reprinted cards with Final Fantasy skins that can appear in play boosters, the packs we use when playing Draft and Sealed, and while it's not quite as common as some of the bonus sheets we've seen where we have one bonus sheet card in every pack, it also isn't as rare as the very small bonus sheets we've seen in the last few sets. One bonus sheet card appears in 1 in 3 play boosters, so knowing about these cards is likely to be helpful at the pre-release and beyond. I use a letter grade system to punctuate my evaluation of each of these cards, so if you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what those letter grades mean, you can find an explanation in the description. Also, there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. You get access to my ongoing set notes during preview season, and you'll get a spreadsheet with all of my grades once the set review is complete. If those perks interest you, check out the description where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's dive in with a look at the bonus sheet. First, we've got Hero of Light, which is a reprint of Adeline Resplendent Cathar, which for 1 generic and 2 white is a star 4 legendary human knight with vigilance. Hero of Light's power is equal to the number of creatures you control. And whenever you attack, for each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Adeline is really good. The fact you get a token even when she doesn't attack is great, and her power tends to go through the roof, making her a must-kill between how hard she hits and how many bodies she can add to the board. I'm giving this a B+. Next, it's Knights of Sandoria, which is a reprint of Ranger Captain of Eos, which for 1 generic and 2 white is a 3/3 human soldier ranger. When it enters, you may search your library for a creature card with mana value 1 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle, and you can sacrifice it, and your opponents can't cast non-creature spells this turn. This does need a build-around grade because if you can't tutor up a 1 mana value creature with it consistently, it is not that great, since at that point it's just a 1-for-1 that can maybe turn off non-creatures at some point by giving itself up, which is often not worth doing in Limited. However, if it can tutor up a 1-drop, it becomes a pretty nice 2-for-1. It's like a C- in a deck that has like one 1-drop and a B+ in a deck that has 3 or more. Next up, it's Furion Swordmaster, which is a reprint of Sram, Senior Edificer, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/2 legendary dwarf advisor. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, you draw a card. Sram's going to be pretty good in this set, mostly because of the equipment part. This set has equipment all over the place, and Red-White in particular is very into it, making Sram a natural fit there. I think most white decks will probably have 4 or so cards that trigger Sram, and if you only draw 1 card off of this ability, you're going to feel like you're way ahead. It doesn't feel like he needs a build-around grade because the format is just naturally seeded with the stuff he likes, especially in white, giving him a B+. Next, it's Blessings of the Oracle, which is a reprint of Akroma's Will. It's 3 generic and a white for an instant, and it says choose one. If you control a commander as you cast this spell, you may choose both instead. Creatures you control gain Flying Vigilance and Double Strike until end of turn, or creatures you control gain Lifelink, Indestructible, and protection from each color until end of turn. Obviously enough, you're only ever going to get 1 mode from this in Limited. Both modes do want you to have a reasonable board state to do their thing, and that's a problem sometimes, but whichever mode you choose, this does a ton, and your board doesn't even need to be that built out. This is because the first mode gives you Flying and Vigilance, which means you can probably send everything in without worrying about giving something up on defense, and Double Strike makes the damage devastating. The second mode, meanwhile, makes your whole board unblockable and gains you a ton of life, so you also don't need to worry too much about the backswing. Throw in the fact that you can also cast this defensively in a pinch to save your creatures or something, and I think this is actually pretty good, even if it doesn't do anything on its own, giving it a B. Next up, it's Squall Leonhard, which is a reprint of Danitha Capuchin Paragon. It's 2 generic and a white for a 2/2 legendary human knight with First Strike Vigilance and Lifelink, and aura and equipment spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast. Again, this set has a lot of equipment for this to take advantage of, and the keywords make it a good place to stick that stuff. I'm giving this a B-. Next, it's Noctis Lucas Calum, which is a reprint of Kenrith the Returned King. For 4 generic and a white, it's a 5/5 legendary human noble, and it has 5 activated abilities. The first costs 1 red mana, and all your creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. The second one costs 1 generic and a green and puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature. The third one costs 2 generic and a white, and target player gains 5 life. The fourth one costs 3 generic and a blue, and target player draws a card. And the last one is 4 generic and a black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. While it's tempting to imagine Kenrith in 5-color decks, he's even really good in 2-color decks since he's a 5-mana 5/5 with access to 2 activated abilities, both the life gain one and at least one other one. He certainly gets better the more colors you play, and if you have a few treasure lying around, he gets to be pretty good, but my point is that you really don't need to go that hard for him to be good. This is actually the second time we've seen him on a bonus sheet, so we have a decent idea of how he plays in Limited, giving him a B+. Next up, it's Garnet Till Alexandros 17th, which is a reprint of Loran of the Third Path. It's 2 generic and a white for a legendary human artificer. It's a 2/1, has vigilance, and when it enters, you destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, and you can tap it, and you and target opponent each draw a card. So Loran will have something to blow up when it enters pretty often, and that's where most of the value comes from, since you generally get a 2-for-1 up front. It is worth remembering that blowing up a job select equipment isn't always going to feel great because they still have their token that they got from it, but it's still fine. Like, that's not going to feel like a full-on 2-for-1, but if she always comes into play and blows up a job select equipment, I think you'll be fine with that. And she'll frequently hit more important things where you do get a full card worth of value, and her symmetrical card draw effect actually isn't terrible either, so I'm giving this a B. Next, it's Minwu, Rebellion Strategist, which is a reprint of Mangara the Diplomat. It's 3 generic and a white for a 2/4 legendary human cleric with lifelink. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. Mangara can be super frustrating to play against. Its stats aren't great, but punishing your opponent for just playing the game and doing what they want to do is pretty great. He changes the game for them in a big way, and if he doesn't do that, your opponent is likely to let you draw some cards, giving him a B. Next up, it's Memories of Nibelheim, which is a reprint of Stroke of Midnight, which for 2 generic and a white is an instant that says destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 white human creature token. So far, everything we've seen so far has been pretty good for Limited, but this isn't. It's terrible. The flexibility doesn't make up for the fact that your opponent gets something back, meaning you go behind on cards for the most part. It only feels good when you kill the absolute biggest bomb ever, and that's not something that happens all the time in Limited or even in every game. And we've seen this card a ton and cards like it a ton, and they are always Fs in Limited. The data backs that up. They always have one of the lowest win rates in a format, and I think a lot of people overrate them because a card like this is so good in higher power level formats like Commander, where you do have juicy targets for it all the time, but casting this to kill your opponent's like 3-drop isn't really what you want to be doing, and you need your removal to do that sometimes, and this doesn't do a good job of it. So this is just an F. Next, it's the Imperial City of Arcades, which for 1 generic and a white is a reprint of Wall of Omens. It's a creature wall, 0/4 defender, and when it enters, you draw a card. This is a nice, classic, powerful card. It adds a solid defensive body to the board and gets you that card. It's not going to feel like a full-on 2-for-1 because a 2-mana 0/4 isn't necessarily worth a card, but there are some ways to sacrifice stuff for value, especially in black-white, and this is pretty good sacrifice fodder, in addition to being like an okay defensive body that draws you a card. So, giving it a C+. Next, it's Wild Rose Rebellion, a reprint of Counterspell, and it's 2 blue mana for an instant, counter target spell. It can be tough to leave mana up for Counterspell sometimes in Limited because you just don't always have double blue around. Like, if you want to cast a blue spell on your turn and also have mana up for Counterspell, that can be a big ask, and that is a problem that holds it back. Like, if this were 1 generic and a blue, straight up Counterspell would probably be as high as a B+, because it's so much easier to have that mana. But the mana restriction is a real thing, and we've seen this on bonus sheets in the recent past too, and it's good, but it's not great because you just can't always have mana up for your counterspell when you need it in Limited, so it's a B-. Next up, it's Terra Branford, which is a reprint of Urza Lord High Artificer. For 2 generic and 2 blue, it's a legendary human artificer. That's a 1/4, and when it enters, you make a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with. This token gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. You can tap an untapped artifact you control and add blue, and you can pay 5 generic, shuffle your library, then exile the top card, and until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana costs. So a 4-mana 1/4 that makes a 1/1 is the floor here, and that's not horrendous, and that 1/1 will often be quite a bit larger in a set with fairly prominent artifact themes, especially in blue-white. That also means you'll be able to tap them for mana, and Urza's own activated ability is a nice place to sink mana when you are flooding out. This is another one that doesn't really need a build-around grade. Urza's pretty good on its own, and most decks will have enough artifacts to power him up to bomb level, giving him an A. Next up, it's Master Zand, which is Venser, Shaper, Savant. For 2 generic and 2 blue, it's a legendary human wizard. It's a 2/2 with flash, and when it enters, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. Adding a 2/2 to the board while bouncing something from the battlefield or from the stack is pretty strong, giving this a B. Next, it's Endwalker, which for 1 blue mana is a reprint of Brainstorm. It's an instant, draw 3, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Brainstorm is not actually that insane in Limited. It was like a C- when we had it on the Strixhaven bonus sheet, and that was a set with even more spell payoffs than this one. The thing is, it really doesn't net you a card. It largely just gives you card selection, and while that's nice and all, it isn't exactly powerful. It does get better if you have some shuffle effects because you can increase your card quality even more at that point, but I think this is going to be a C- here, just like it was in Strixhaven. Next, it's To the Crystal Tower, which is a reprint of Cryptic Command. It's 1 generic and 3 blue for an instant that says choose to, counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures your opponents control, draw a card. So, triple blue can be a challenge, but once you can cast this, it does serious work. Countering a spell and drawing a card feels great, so does countering a spell and bouncing something, or bouncing something and drawing a card. The tap-down mode is more situational than the other ones, but when it's good, it's really good because it just gets all your opponent's creatures out of the way, and then you swing for lethal because, you're only going to choose that option when that's what you get out of it. So this looks really good. The mana cost definitely holds it back, but it's a B. Next up, it's Vanadiel Adventures, a reprint of Laboratory Maniac. It's 2 generic and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. And if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. Yeah, no, this isn't here for Limited. Keeping this fragile creature in play while milling your whole deck and trying to win with this is a horrible plan. It's an F. Next up, it's Stay With Me, which for 2 generic and a blue is a reprint of Rhystic Study. It's an enchantment, and whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 generic. Like Stroke of Midnight, this is a card that's amazing in Commander, but not good at all in Limited. It had an absolutely horrendous win rate in Wilds of Eldraine, if you don't believe me. We've seen this on a bonus sheet in the recent past, and in a set with a huge enchantment theme, and it was still bad. The problem is that you spend 3 mana and don't add to the board, and then you're just taxing your opponent a little, which sounds nice, but because you played out this do-nothing card, it doesn't matter a whole lot, because you've sort of taxed yourself 3 mana to start things off, so it's going to be a while before they ever run into having spent as much mana as you do, and even if they let you draw 1 card with it, you're still not really going to feel like you came out ahead. By the time you get the second card, you kind of do, but this card just doesn't do enough. Like, if you're behind and you draw this, it's a terrible card. If you play it on turn 3, instead of playing a 3-drop, it's a terrible card. So it's one of these cards that just doesn't have a good way to use it. For one thing, players don't cast spells like crazy like they do in Commander. For another thing, you don't have multiple opponents who have to pay this. So, yeah, it's just an F. Next up, it's Adia Kramer, which is a reprint of Teferi, Mage of Jalfir, which for 2 generic and 3 blue is a 3/4 legendary human wizard with flash. Creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield have flash, and each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. Teferi shutting down your opponent from doing stuff at instant speed and allowing you to cast stuff as though it has flash is fine, but you'd be surprised how often neither of those effects makes a significant difference in a Limited game. Flashing him himself in ambush blocking is nice, though, and those effects do have upside that comes up. It's just not insane or anything. And the triple blue doesn't help him either. I'm giving him a C+. Next, it's Kefka's Tower, which for 3 generic and 3 black is a reprint of Bolas's Citadel, a legendary artifact that lets you look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than its mana cost, and then you tap it and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. This is another card that's good in constructed formats, but not as good in Limited. That said, it's not terrible either. You often play this and just start casting things from your library, which usually means you add to the board. It is true you don't always have the life to pay once you reach that point, but if you have some life gain in your deck, it can offset things in a big way. It does stink when you hit a land, because you can only play 1 land a turn, obviously, and that ends the chain, and that will probably result in you being in a whole lot of trouble because you spent 6 mana and didn't impact the board. But this is a pretty real value engine that you can definitely go off with in Limited. It happens sometimes back in, I think, War of the Spark is where this was originally printed. And, it has a ton of potential. It just also takes some work. I'm giving it a B-. Next up, it's Darkness of Eternity, which is a reprint of Dark Ritual, which for 1 black mana is an instant that adds 3 black. Here's another one that will surprise those of you who mostly play 60-card and 100-card formats. Dark Ritual is terrible in limited. Sure, a mana boost is nice, but using up a card for the boost essentially means you 2-for-1 yourself with whatever it is you cast using the mana. There just aren't powerful enough things for you to do in limited that you can feel all that good about using this for the boost, and this is another one where we have data from the Strixhaven bonus sheet, and it was horrible in that format, giving it an F. Next up, it's Battle at the Big Bridge, which is a reprint of Fatal Push. It's 1 black mana for an instant that destroys target creature if it has mana value 2 or less, and it has Revolt. Destroy that creature if it has mana value 4 or less instead, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn. This is really good removal. Setting up Revolt is pretty doable, especially in black, so I think it's premium because you'll often be able to spend 1 mana to destroy something that costs 3 or 4, and spending 1 mana to destroy a 2-drop even feels pretty good, giving it a B. Next up, it's Golbez, Clad in Darkness, which is a reprint of Sir Conrad the Grim. 3 generic and 2 black for a 5/4 legendary human knight, and whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Golbez deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you can also pay 1 generic and a black, and each player mills a card. Sir Conrad was pretty strong the last time we saw him. It was a while ago, to be fair, but you'd be surprised how often you can trigger his ability and bleed your opponent out, and he even comes with a built-in way to do it, which makes him far better. His stat line these days probably does make him lag behind a little bit from where he was when we saw him originally printed in like 2019 or whatever, but I do think black decks will be able to trigger him enough for him to be a B. Next, it's the Emperor, Hell Tyrant, which is a reprint of Yawgmoth, Ran Physician. It's 2 generic and 2 black for a 2/4 legendary human cleric with protection from humans, and he can pay 1 life and sacrifice another creature to put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature and draw a card, and he can pay 2 black and discard a card and proliferate. So Yawgmoth can combo off in other formats. That's going to be pretty hard to do in this one, although you do have access to, at uncommon, an aristocrat effect, a life gain, blood artist effect for every time you sack a creature. And if you have enough creatures, you can sort of offset the life you pay. So those 2 cards can combo pretty gross. They're not going to be like an infinite combo like the stuff that Yawgmoth can do in Modern. But that's okay too, because this is just a really good card. Anyway, protection from humans plays really well in this format. The ability to give up creatures to put counters on things and draw a card, that's just a really powerful sacrifice payoff. The proliferate thing can even come up too. You can add -1/-1 counters to things, but that ability is probably the least powerful part about this card, especially in limited. I'd even say the protection is even more important, but really it's the pay 1 life ability that really makes this card great, giving it a B+. Next up, it's Baron Rivalry, which is a reprint of Deadly Dispute. 1 generic and a black, instant. As an additional cost to cast this, sacrifice an artifact or creature, draw 2 cards, and create a treasure token. This is a sweet card. Being able to give up artifacts or creatures makes it easy to have fodder, especially in the black-white deck. Sacrificing treasure can itself feel good since you get 1 back and draw 2, but there's plenty of other stuff to sack in the format too. This was a B, one of the best non-rare cards in Forgotten Realms. And while that set had a treasure theme specifically, this set has enough fodder to sacrifice things to, like Job Select, that I think this will still be a B in the format. Next up, it's Shantoto's Coercion, which is a reprint of Diabolic Intent. For 1 generic and a black, it's a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, and then shuffle. So I think this needs a build-around grade. I mean, I'm sort of tempted to just give it an F, but I don't think that's entirely fair. The reason it is an F a lot of the time is because 2-for-1ing yourself to tutor something up just isn't what you want to do. But if you have good sacrificial fodder, in this format there is a lot of, it does get better, but you also need to be having a super powerful bomb in your deck, or at least one, and hopefully more than that, for this to be really worthwhile, because even when you do have good fodder, this still isn't an amazing tutor because of the cost and having to set it up and everything. But I do think there will be decks in the format that both have a lot of sacrifice fodder and have some really powerful card to search up, that it does deserve a build-around grade. It's an F in most decks, but I think a C+ in a deck like the one I described. Next, it's the Shadow Lord, which is a reprint of Gix Yawgmoth Praetor, which for 1 generic and 2 black is a 3/3 legendary Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, draw a card. And you can pay 4 generic and 3 black and discard X cards and exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. This was really good last time we saw it, and it will be here too. You often cast it and immediately attack your opponent and draw, and that's where most of the value comes from. Sometimes you do actually get to a point in the late game where you can use that other ability and really go wild, but don't count on it too much. He is small, and you can't always get in for a hit, but you do often enough for this to be a bomb, giving him an A-. Next, it's Selch Acian, which is a reprint of Kirik, son of Yawgmoth, which for 4 generic and 3 black Phyrexian mana, meaning you can pay 2 life or black mana for each of those symbols, is a 2/2 legendary Phyrexian horror minion. It's got lifelink, and for each swamp in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. Whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Selch. This was really, really bad last time we saw it in Limited, and that's probably not surprising. It's a card that's all in on one color. When you're virtually always 2 colors, it starts out super small for the cost, and it's very hard to grow. It's an F. Next up, it's Arden Izunia, which is a reprint of Varigoth Blood Sky Sire, which for 2 generic and a black is a 2/3 legendary demon rogue with Death Touch, and it has Boast. 1 generic and a black, target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles and puts that card on top. This is just okay. The base stats aren't that good, but it does have Death Touch, and that means that you can turn it sideways and boast, and no matter what, your opponent has to give something up to kill it. And if they don't, you can probably just keep boasting and making sure you draw whatever the best card is for you next from your deck. But the thing that makes this less impressive than it might seem when you first read it, especially in Limited, is that putting a card on top of your library is just, it's not that strong. It's effectively not that much different than like Scry 1. I mean, it's a little better, right? But I'm just trying to express how weak that effect is compared to how strong people seem to think it is. Because this doesn't net you a card, it just lets you decide what the next card you draw is. And that's just not that strong. And you know, you're only gonna boast when you have the mana to do it anyway. And again, it's part of the problem is the power level of your cards in a Limited deck aren't such that you can put something on top that's absolutely game-breaking, basically, ever. So I think it's just a C. That's what it was when we saw it last time. Next, it's Dragon of Mount Gulg, which is a reprint of Ancient Copper Dragon. For 4 generic and 2 red, it's a 6/5 Elder Dragon with flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20 and create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. This is a pretty efficient flyer, and while you can't always do something with the treasure it generates, it is some pretty real value, and if you have anything to do in your hand or activated abilities on the board, you're going to be able to pretty much do all of it. There are also some payoffs for treasure and sacrificing artifacts that make it better. I'm giving it a B. That's what it was last time we saw it too. Next up, it's Gilgamesh Weapon Collector, which is a reprint of Godo Bandit Warlord, which for 5 generic and a red is a 3/3 legendary human barbarian. When it enters, you search your library for an equipment, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. And when it attacks for the first time each turn, untap it and all samurai you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. A 6-mana 3/3 obviously isn't good, but this format has plenty of equipment for Gilgamesh to tutor directly to the battlefield, and grabbing any and all of it will feel pretty good. I mean, just searching up a job select equipment means not only do you get the equipment, you get a creature that it gets attached to. So he's always going to come with a bunch of extra value when you cast him, even if it's just a common job select equipment. That's a perfectly fine floor. And there are plenty of more powerful equipments around too that you can search up when you need to. One of the best combos is the one where you search up the samurai's katana, because then you also have a samurai in play who can take advantage of everything, and it has haste. So, you know, that's going to be a pretty sweet combo. But yeah, I mean, he just ends up tutoring up a card directly to the battlefield and giving you a body at the same time, and just, that's pretty good. The extra combat phase isn't always easy to take advantage of. It is better if you can equip Dodo, but you can't always, so I'm giving it a B. Next, it's Kefka Palazzo, which is a reprint of Perforos, God of the Forge, which for 3 generic and a red is a 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, it isn't a creature. Whenever another creature you control enters, it does 2 damage to each opponent, and you can pay 2 generic and a red to give all of your creatures +1/+0 until end of turn. So it's not always easy to get your devotion high enough in 2-color limited decks, so you do have to lean pretty hard on how good Perforos is as an enchantment, and he's really only a kind of okay one. Impact Tremors-like effects can be bad and limited because you have to draw them at the right time, before you start playing your creatures, to really get the full value out of them. Perforos can also buff your whole board, which is nice, and when it does become a creature, it's pretty scary, but it won't be one that often. I'm giving it a B-. Next, it's Vaughn, Aspiring Sky Pirate, which is a reprint of Captain Lannery Storm, which for 2 generic and a red is a 2/2 legendary creature, human pirate with haste. When it attacks, you make a treasure. Whenever you sack a treasure, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So Lannery has been a nice creature who often comes down and swings and trades for something while giving you a treasure, and that's perfectly fine, but it has some upside beyond that. Some downside too, it can't always threaten to trade, obviously enough. I'm giving it a B-. Next, it's a Promise Fulfilled, which is a reprint of Light Up the Stage, which is 2 generic and a red for a sorcery with Spectacle for 1 red. That means you can pay that alternate cost if your opponent has lost life this turn. And you exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you can play those cards. This ends up being a really, really good draw spell for red decks. Even paying 3 isn't a disaster, and only paying 1 mana to draw 2 is great, giving it a B-. Next, it's Thrum of the Vestige, which is a reprint of Lightning Bolt. It's 1 red mana for an instant that does 3 damage to any target. Yeah, I mean, we all know this is insanely good. It can trade up in a big way for only 1 mana when it's removing stuff. It can go after the opponent. 1 mana for 3 damage is just such an amazing rate. It's a B+. Next, it's Dawn Warrior's Legacy, a reprint of Mythics' Mastery, which for 3 generic and a red is a sorcery that says exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Exile Dawn Warrior's Legacy, and it has Overload for 5 generic and 3 red, and if you do that, it targets every instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So, last time we saw this on a bonus sheet in Strixhaven, it was a very, very real win condition. And there are some parallels between that format and this one. For one thing, that format had a spell deck in blue-red that had a ton of ramp, and we pretty much have that too in blue-red. So I think this is probably a real build-around. If you overload this in the right deck, you're just going to win the game. But you need a really good, grindy spell deck for that to work out. I mean, I think it's an F in most red decks, but an A- level build-around. Next, it's Cloud Strife, which is a reprint of Najeela the Blade Blossom, which for 2 generic and a red is a 3/2 legendary human warrior. Whenever a warrior attacks, you may have its controller create a 1/1 white warrior creature token that's tapped and attacking, and you can pay 1 mana of each color, untap all attacking creatures, they gain trample, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, activate only during combat. We can mostly ignore the 5 mana ability. You'll get access to it on rare occasions, but when we're evaluating this card, we mostly have to look at the first part, and he's really good. And each individual warrior that attacks will make one of these 1/1s. It's not one of those triggers where it says whenever 1 or more warriors attacks, each warrior will make one, and that includes this creature itself. Anytime it attacks, will be making one, and even if that's all it was, if it wasn't all warriors who gave you the trigger, it would still be a good card, so I think he's a B. Next, it's Zidane Tribal, a reprint of Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, which for 1 red mana is a 2/1 legendary monkey pirate, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you make a treasure and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card, and it has dash for 1 generic and a red, which means you can cast it for that cost, and it has haste, but it has to return to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So, Ragavan is great everywhere, including in limited. If it hits your opponent, it generates absurd value in the form of treasure and a card you can often cast. Someone playing this on turn 1 often means they just win if their opponent doesn't deal with it. But what makes Ragavan especially good is that it can also dash later in the game and get in for a hit out of nowhere and give you the same powerful trigger. Now, Ragavan can't always get in for a hit like that, and he does have diminishing value the longer the game goes on. He's not as good in limited as he is in, 60 card formats where you can really go crazy with him and consistently get him on turn 1 and stuff like that, but he's still really good, giving him a B+. Next, it's Princess Sarah, a reprint of Azusa, Lost But Seeking, which for 2 generic and a green is a 1/2 legendary human monk. You may play 2 additional lands in each of your turns. So even in a set with landfall, this effect is largely meaningless and limited, even when you play it on turn 3. This is because you need extra lands in your hand for it to do something, and that does not line up very often unless you're drawing lots of extra cards. These sorts of effects are always super underwhelming in limited, and we've seen this one be underwhelming before, and underwhelming is even an understatement because it's got a bad stat line and a text box that is almost entirely irrelevant and gets worse even later the game goes on, so it's an F. Next up, it's the Cloudseed Djinn, which is a reprint of Nyxbloom Ancient, which for 4 generic and 3 green is a 5/5 enchantment creature elemental with trample. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. By the time you drop this, you don't need a bunch of mana, and you're playing a very mediocre 7 mana 5/5 trampler, so it's a D. Next, it's Fall Sea Paradise, a reprint of Carpet of Flowers. which is 1 green mana for an enchantment, and at the beginning of each of your main phases, if you haven't added mana with this ability this turn, you may add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of islands target opponent controls. This is a pretty old school reprint that it's kind of cool to see, and obviously it's a sideboard card, since it does stone nothing unless an opponent is playing islands, but against an opponent playing blue, this can be kind of absurd in the early game, where the mana boost it grants you just keeps on delivering and lets you build out your board way more quickly than they ever can. It is less good later in the game, but that early game upside is very good. It's an F in your main deck, but a C+ out of your sideboard. Next, it's Newfound Adventure, which is a reprint of Farseek, which for 1 generic and a green is a sorcery. Search your library for a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This is very good. You know, Rampant Growth plays pretty well in limited formats. You don't always want to pay 2 to not add to the board, but you do get really good fixing out of this. Not as good as in some formats because you don't have dual lands, but it's going to ramp your mana the way you want to. It'll help you trigger landfall. It's a C+. Next, it's Vayne Carudis Solidor, which is a reprint of Finn the Fangbearer, which for 1 generic and a green is a 1/3 human warrior with Death Touch. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So as we saw last time, it's near impossible to win the game with this in limited, but the good news is a 2 mana 1/3 with Death Touch is a very solid card. It can trade with anything, be a very real roadblock, and the alternate win condition stuff is just not relevant for the most part. It's a C. Next, it's Search for the Frozen Esper, which is a reprint of Nature's Claim, which is 1 green mana for an instant. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Its controller gains 4 life. This is a super efficient way to deal with artifacts and enchantments, but only being focused on those probably makes it a little too narrow for the format. It'll actually have targets pretty often, but this is a case where blowing up a saga creature that has already gotten a couple chapters or a job select equipment just isn't worth it, because you are using up a whole card here. You're also giving them some life, which isn't irrelevant, like it's a downside, and oftentimes it doesn't matter because this is so efficient, but if you're blowing up something like a job select equipment or a creature saga they already got value out of, it definitely matters because you're also going to be behind on cards for the most part. So I do think this is a sideboard card. You bring it in against opponents who have targets that aren't those things, and there will be enough of those, and I think it's a C+ against opponents like that. Next up, it's Astral Titan, which is a reprint of Primeval Titan. For 4 generic and 2 green, it's a 6/6 giant with trample, and when it enters or attacks, you search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. A 6 mana 6/6 trampler that grabs 2 lands when it enters and does it again when it attacks is amazing, albeit not as amazing as it is in non-limited formats, mostly because you aren't in a huge need of mana at that point, and you also don't have a deck filled with awesome utility lands that you can tutor up that will buff the Titan or hate on what your opponent's doing. You're just mostly going to have regular old lands in your deck. But grabbing lands itself is nice value on a big creature, and it'll certainly make sure you get to cast whatever you want on subsequent turns, while also fixing your mana if you still needed to do that. It's a B+. Next, it's Warrior of Light, which is a reprint of Joda the Unifier. It's 1 mana of each color for a 5/5 legendary human wizard. Legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. And whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This format is overloaded with legendary creatures, and I think it also has enough fixing to sometimes be able to cast this thing. It'll probably be the easiest in a deck with a blue-green base, which has extra incentive to play towns, and Joda is likely to buff a decent number of creatures. It does buff itself, even when it's alone. It's a 6/6, and it's gonna, you play another legendary creature, they both get +2/+2. All of that seems doable, but it is the kind of card that you really have to dock a ton for how hard it is to cast. It's hard to cast, and it really needs you to have as many legendary things in your deck as possible, and that second part is more doable than the first part, so I think we have to give it a C+. Next, it's Cecil Harvey, which is a reprint of Timna the Weaver, which for 1 generic, a white and a black, is a 2/2 legendary human cleric with lifelink. And at the beginning of each of your post-combat main phases, you can pay X life, where X is the number of opponents who were dealt combat damage this turn. If you do, draw X cards, and it has partner, but that doesn't matter for us. A 3 mana 2/2 with lifelink that draws you a card on some turns is pretty good. It can't usually do the job on its own because it's so inefficient, but if you simply play this after hitting your opponent with your 2-drop, you're already going to feel like you're way ahead. The stat line being bad does hurt it some, though, giving it a B. Next, it's Bart's Clouser, which is a reprint of Winota, Joiner of Forces, which for 2 generic, a red and a white, is a 4/4 legendary human warrior. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. This format definitely has a good mix of humans and non-humans, so Winota can be pretty powerful. One thing of note that isn't exactly intuitive for the red-white deck especially is that job select equipment's tokens are just heroes, they aren't humans, so they'll be able to trigger this. Your deck does need a mix of humans and non-humans, but I think that whole job select thing makes that job a lot easier. You may whiff sometimes on this trigger in Limited, but you'll get a hit off of it more often than you don't in your typical red-white deck, and if you play Winota when you already have a non-human ready to swing, that's when the value generated immediately is insane. This can just be a straight up bomb, but I do think it'll whiff often enough to just be a B+ in this format. Next, it's Sephiroth the Savior, which is a reprint of Atraxa Grand Unifier, which for 3 generic, a green, a white, a blue, and a black, is a 7/7 legendary Phyrexian angel with flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. When it enters, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library, and for each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So if you can cast this or reanimate it, which a few cards in the format can do, you're not going to lose the game. You're likely to draw like 4 cards in addition to adding this huge thing to the battlefield with all these keywords. The mana cost is challenging, but it does include green, and that definitely matters. And at least with a mana cost as challenging as this one, this is a card that basically just reads you win the game. So I think it does get a bomb grade. I'm giving it an A-. Next, it's Hugo Kupka, which is a reprint of Bruce Tarl Boorish Herder, which for 2 generic, a red and a white, is a 3/3 legendary human ally, and when it enters or attacks, target creature you control gains double strike and lifelink until end of turn, and it's another partner. So if you have anything at all in play, it can likely take advantage of double strike and lifelink in a big way, and this can do it all again on the next turn. It can also give itself the buff. Obviously, when it enters, you don't want to do that, but when it's the one that's attacking, a 3/3 with double strike and lifelink is pretty good. The Hill Giant base stats are the one thing here that isn't great. Sometimes your opponent will be able to kill him, but that enters trigger is going to do something significant when he enters like 90% of the time, and they're only going to kill him after he's already done that at a minimum. So I do think he's a bomb. I'm giving him an A-. Next, it's Shadowbringers, which is a reprint of Dovin's Veto. It's a white and a blue for an instant that can't be countered, and it counters target non-creature spell. This being uncounterable doesn't come up much, so in Limited, it's mostly a harder to cast negate, which really isn't something you want most of the time. It's a D+. Next up, it's Kuja Mage Manufacturer, which is a reprint of Anala Archmage Ritualist, which for 2 generic, a blue, a black, and a red, is a 4/5 human wizard. It has Eminence. Whenever another non-token wizard you control enters, if Kuja is in the command zone, that part doesn't matter, but this part does, or on the battlefield, you may pay 1 generic. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that wizard. That token gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Tap 5 untapped wizards you control. Target player loses 7 life. This set does have a lot of wizards and ways to make wizard tokens, so it's not impossible to play Anala and do 7 on the same turn sometimes. Copying wizards is a little trickier because you need to get a non-token one in play at the right time and have 1 generic mana, and even then there's no guarantee that making a temporary wizard will make a significant difference. But this set does look well positioned for this card overall. I'm giving it a B. Next, it's Benedicta Harmon, which is a reprint of Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker, which for 2 generic, a white and a blue, is a 1/1 legendary bird monk with flying. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and it has partner. So the text box is cool and all, but starting out as a 4-mana 1/1 is just a huge liability. We've seen lots of expensive 1/1s that gain counters when something happens, and they're never good in Limited, mostly because they just die to like a 1-mana spell. And even if your opponent can't kill them, which is the most backbreaking thing, they can also just say, okay, well, I untap and attack with everything. What are you doing with your 1/1? You know, so it ends up just not working out very well for the most part, giving it a D. Next, it's Lightning Lone Commando, which is a reprint of Ishin, 2 Heavens as 1, which for a red, a white, and a black is a 3/4 legendary human samurai. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. There are some abilities around, but not so many of them that Ishin's trigger is going to matter consistently, and going 3 colors to play a card that needs just the right board state isn't great. I'm giving it a C. Next, it's Seymour Guado, a reprint of Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, which for a blue and a green is a legendary human druid, a 2/2. And whenever you tap an on-land permanent for mana, you add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced, and you can pay 5 generic, a green, and a blue, and look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. There are some mana rocks and creatures who tap for mana in this set, but not so many that Kinnan is going to be great in every blue-green deck. When you do have enough of those cards, though, this ramps your mana in a massive way, and that makes the late-game mana sink ability it has even better, and that ability alone is pretty good. You just don't get access to it every game, and when you do get access to it, it's pretty late. But that's not true when you're already ramping your mana thanks to Kinnan's other ability. I do think it needs a build-around grade because it's like a C- in a lot of blue-green decks, but I think it's a B in a lot of them too. Next, it's Barnabas Tharmer, which is a reprint of Crom, Ludovic's Opus, which for 3 generic, a blue and a red, is a 4/4 legendary zombie horror with flying and haste. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card, and it has partner. A 5-mana 4/4 with flying and haste is fine, and punishing your opponent for double spelling is pretty nice, though far from something that is guaranteed to trigger. I'm giving it a B-. Next, it's Orphan, Cocoon Fal'Cie, which is a reprint of Muldrotha the Gravetide. For 3 generic, a green, a black, and a blue, it's a 6/6 legendary elemental avatar. During each of your turns, you may play a land and cast permanent spells of each permanent type from your graveyard. Muldrotha is a sweet value play, since if you get to untap with it in play, you're often able to play multiple permanents from your graveyard. This format has a sizable graveyard theme in these 3 colors too, so you're going to be able to take advantage of it. She's not always something you can cast easily, and that holds her back some, but I still think she's a B. Next, it's Titus, Xanarkand Faith, which is a reprint of Thrasios, Triton Hero, which for a green and a blue is a 1/3 legendary merfolk wizard. You can pay 4 generic and scry 1, then reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, otherwise draw a card, and it has partner. This activated ability is pretty useful, though it's only something you start doing when you can't do anything else at all, but when you reach that point, it is nice to have this in play. It digs you deep in your deck and can usually help you win really long games. I'm giving it a C+. Next, it's Clive Rossfield, which is a reprint of Vile Smasher the Fierce. For 1 generic, a black and a red is a 2/3 Goblin Berserker, a legendary one. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, choose an opponent at random. Clive Rossfield deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to that player or a planeswalker that player controls, and it's another meaningless partner. This can inflict a lot of extra damage, and obviously in one-on-one, it's always just going to hit your opponent. Playing this on 3 is going to really concern them, but even in the late game, your opponent has to start stressing what card you draw every single turn, because it might just mean the end for them because you get a bunch of damage on top of getting a new spell or whatever in play. I think it's a B. Next, it's Yuffie Kisaragi, which is a reprint of Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow, which for 1 generic, a blue and a black, is a 1/3 legendary human ninja. It has Commander Ninjutsu for a blue and a black, and I looked this up to be super sure, but for our purposes, it's basically just ninjutsu. You can ninjutsu from your hand with Commander Ninjutsu, as well as from the command zone is the only difference. And that means if you have a creature get through unblocked, you have a window where you can put this creature into play for a blue and a black, and return the unblocked creature to your hand. And whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, you reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. Even getting in once with this is really good card advantage. Like paying 2 to get in with this and bounce a thing to your hand and draw a card, maybe damage your opponent, is great. If you can get in with it more, things get really out of hand. And there are a few other ninjas in the set, including a ninja job select equipment. There aren't a ton of them. It's not a big theme. It's not a Kamigawa set, or this would be even better, but it's still really good. I'm giving it a B+. Next, it's Giant of Babel, which is a reprint of Traxos, Scourge of Krug, which for 4 generic is a 7/7 legendary artifact creature construct with trample. It enters tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. Whenever you cast a historic spell, untap Giant of Babel. This set probably has the most historic spells of any set ever. I guess maybe some really artifact-heavy sets might give it a run for its money, but this set has a ton of sagas, it has a ton of equipment, it has a ton of legendary creatures, and then also some artifacts that aren't any of those things. So untapping this is very doable. Now, you can't really play Traxos in a deck that has like 4 things that can untap it, which I think a lot of decks, that is still about what you're going to have. But I think it's also very doable to have like 10 ways to untap it. And once you're there, Traxos gets to be pretty good. Needs a build-around grade, though. I mean, it's an F in a deck where you can't consistently untap it, but a B in a deck with like 10+ historic cards. Next, it's Crystal of Altar Cave, a reprint of Chromatic Lantern, which for 3 generic is an artifact. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. This isn't all that exciting and limited. It fixes and ramps your mana, but it also doesn't add to the board. It was terrible when we saw it in the Brothers War, like an F. Now, I do think it's probably going to be better in this set than it was in that one. That set was pretty fast, and maybe this one is too, and it ends up being an F. But right now, I think it's a D+, which obviously still not a great grade. Next, it's The Straw, which is a reprint of Smuggler's Copter, which for 2 generic is a 3/3 artifact vehicle with flying. When it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card, and it has crew 1. This card is such a beating. Super easy to crew, really efficient, lets you rip right through your deck, doesn't die to a bunch of sorcery speed removal. Keep in mind, it even loots when you block with it. That is easy to overlook. It can take over games if your opponent can't find an answer. It is so efficient and so good at generating value that I think it's an A-. Next, it's Aluka Stadium, a reprint of Strixhaven Stadium, which for 3 generic is an artifact, and you can tap it for colorless and put a point counter on it. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from this artifact. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on this artifact. Then, if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all, and that player loses the game. And they left out a period in there, which is interesting. So this was one of the worst cards in Strixhaven, and I don't know why things would be any different here. It's a bad mana rock that can't produce mana of any color, and the alternate win condition will never, ever be approached. It's an F. And our last card is Balam Garden, which is a reprint of Command Beacon. It taps for colorless, and you can tap it and sack it and put your commander into your hand from the command zone. So this is an F. The commander part doesn't matter, so you're just playing a land that can only tap for colorless, which is horrible for your mana base. So that does it for a look at every single card that can appear in Final Fantasy Play Boosters, but the limited content for this set is not done yet. I've still got an archetype guide, a top 10 bombs list, and draft videos right around the corner. If you want to stay aware of all that, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the rest of the set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.